Welcome to another edition of Answers for the Family. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza, and today my co-host is a former standout student athlete and California native, Marvin Smith.
And on that note, that brings us to our guest today, George Kimeldorf, who has a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan and retired as professor from the University of Texas at Dallas. He shared with us that he thought he knew the path to happiness, as defined by his parents, friends, and society. Married a wonderful woman, raised two lovely children, having a successful career, and became wealthy. But there was something missing. He was not happy, and he became that person, the seeker. George, welcome to Answers to the Family.
Thank you.
Hey, George, it is great to have you on. And I got to tell you, I think that there are a lot of us that go through a period of time in our life to where we think, maybe I'm not as happy, as I thought I was going to be. And a lot of people do different things. They'll go out and try and search for whatever it is that they think that they're missing. Not as many people actually go out and write a book about it. Well, let's talk about some of the things that are in the book and some of the things that people can do every day to boost their happiness. I think when everybody gets up, if they could have just a few things, what would some of those things be?
Well, let me tell you the first thing. The first thing is very simple and very effective, and that is just to feel and express sincere gratitude. Now, I say sincere gratitude. I mean what you're really grateful for, not gratitude for things for which you should be grateful for. Your teachers tell you should be grateful for. Your minister tells you should be grateful for. But just notice the gratitude you have for little things that you can truly be thankful for. Let me give you an example. I'm going to give some silly examples. You go through a stop sign. You're rolling through a stop sign slowly, hoping there's no cop there. There's no cop there. You got away with it. Have gratitude for that, Have gratitude your backache is gone. Gratitude I've got money for groceries. Just gratitude for the little things in life. You don't have to be big things, but there are just so many things in our life for which we can be grateful. And what happens if you actually do this, don't just think about it, but really do it, until it becomes habitual, you'll find yourself happier. You can't be miserable when you're experiencing gratitude. So that's the first thing. It's really simple. And just make it a habit. I park my car at the airport, and when I get home a week later, my car's still there. Hasn't been damaged. No flat tire. No, I can have gratitude for that.
Hey, George, this is Marvin. Yeah, I'm listening to you, and I got a big smile on my face, so I'm looking over at Al, and we're both smiling. And, because what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, it just seems like what you're saying is when you wake up, being thankful for life. Just all those little things in between and just grateful. I mean, it sounds so simple, which it is, but I think, as you're saying, it's one of those things we have to do it with intent. And that leads me to say, well, why do you think finding happiness is such a challenge for so many people?
By the way, yes, you're right. It does take intent, because we don't have the habit of doing that. And the reason that happiness is such a challenge for many people is because they're looking in the wrong places. In our culture, we teach that the way to be happy is to become wealthy. Or if you're not going to become wealthy, become wise. Get educated. Material success. We teach people that a way to get happiness is get the approval of others. But none of those work. And I'll show that to you. Okay. Look at successful actors. They don't seem to be happier than other people. Look at CEOs of large corporations. You read all about them and how many millions they make. They're not happier than other people. Politicians, not happier than other people. Here's the real interesting thing. Lottery winners. You'd think that you'd win the lottery, you'd be really happy. Psychologists have studied lottery winners. They're easy to study, And if you think they'd be really happy after they won the lottery, you're right. They are ecstatic. They are really happy after they won the lottery. But you look at those people 6 months later, a year later, they are no happier than before. I mean, it's amazing, but people have actually studied that. So one of the reasons that people find it challenging is because we're looking in the wrong places. And this is what our culture teaches us. The second reason that some people find it so challenging to be happy is they believe that they have to earn happiness, like a reward for a righteous life. They may even believe that they don't deserve to be happy. So that's certainly a impediment. Mm-hmm. Third reason, since you've asked, happiness is an experiential skill. You have to learn the skill of happiness, like learning to drive a car. It's challenging to teach yourself happiness. It's challenging to teach yourself how to drive. And it's the kind of thing you really can't learn from a book. My book, and by the way, the name of my book is From Seeker to Finder, From Seeker to Finder, and it's really an introduction. It'll point them in the right direction and sort of show them, how to go, whatever. But you're not going to learn happiness just from reading a book. It takes more.
Well, for me, George, it reminds me of the days when I was playing sports, becoming a professional athlete. It was one of those things that, I just didn't wake up one day, walk on the field and said, I'm great. It was years of practicing those little things over and over, so it just became a habit. And that habit it took me to a different level in the game, so I was able to play professionally. But you're right. It's not something it's something you have to do on a regular basis. And those little steps over and over makes the difference.
Yes, that's exactly right. You're right on. You said it perfectly. It's like learning a sport and like learning any kind of skill. But the interesting thing is that happiness can be learned. In other words, you don't have to be a special kind of person to learn happiness. Anybody can learn the skill. It can be learned.
Well, George, and you bring up a great point when you talk about, the people that win the lottery, and then after about 6 months, they go back to sort of like their set point, or sort of like wherever it was that they really were, or were, or where they learned to find their happiness. How can we change that set point?
But Alan, I want to say something just before you go there, because I'm chuckling. I wouldn't be happy either if I had relatives I'd never seen before now knocking on my door wanting all my money.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So I know when you talk about that survey, there's been surveys done also on people that have been in a serious accident and are now a paraplegic or things like that, and they've also maybe gone through a depression, but they've kind of gotten back to that set point. So how do we retrain our brain? How do we make the changes necessary so that we don't either fall back to what that point is, or in one way or the other?
Oh, now that's a great question. And by the way, as you say, a lot of people have studied this, and they've studied the set points. Well, the first thing you can do is what I mentioned before, is get in the habit of practicing gratitude. Actually make it a habit, day to day, minute to minute. And there's more you can do. The second thing you can do, and this takes some work, as you say, some dedication, is monitor your self-judgmental thoughts. The thoughts you have about how you should be different, how you should be better. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough. Thoughts like, I shouldn't have done that. I'm not smart enough. I'm not thin enough. Even thoughts, I'm not happy enough. All these self-judgmental thoughts cause a lot of unhappiness. Right. And what I'm suggesting is just be aware of such thoughts. In the beginning, don't try to change them. Don't try to make them go away. Because, again, then you're going to have the thought that I shouldn't have those thoughts, okay? You'll be back in the soup again, okay? So the thing you can do, be aware of those thoughts, and be aware of the unhappiness that they cause. It will become clear to you that those thoughts are a principal source of unhappiness. The source of unhappiness is not your boss, not your spouse, and believe it or not your mother-in-law. Okay? So this is what you can do. Just be aware. Monitor those thoughts. And then after that, there are lots of techniques. Like if someone asks me, well, I want to be a good football player. How do I do that? Well, I can't summarize that in 30 seconds, okay? But there are techniques. You can actually learn the art of happiness. And I do, in my book, From Seeker to Finder, I do actually outline those techniques. And I've just told you two, and there are many others. Meditation is another one.
And what are the common mistakes that people make on that path to happiness? As you were just sharing a few as you were a minute ago. But what would be some of those common mistakes?
Well, I think some of the common mistakes that people make, I talked about, some of the common mistakes, for example, they read self-help books, okay? And I've actually found out, for me, self-help books mostly were counterproductive. Self-help books are oriented toward making changes in our external circumstances. If you do this, you'll be happy. If you get the right spouse, you'll be happy. If you divorce that spouse, you'll be happy, okay? If you do this, you'll be happy. So they talk about changing the circumstances in your life in order to get happiness. And that doesn't work. Other self-help books tell us how to improve ourselves. They tempt us with a better future. I'm going to be happy when I do this. I'm going to be happier when I do that. That has two flaws in it. First of all, it's a way of criticizing yourself. And secondly, it puts happiness into the future. I'm going to be happy in the future when I do X, okay? And the future never comes, as you know. You're always in the present, okay?
Right.
So being happy really involves learning how to enjoy the present moment. Right now, this instant, we are talking on the phone. I'm happy, okay?
Yes.
And any one of the listeners, people who are listening, the opportunity is to be happy right now. Accept yourself the way you are. Love yourself the way you are. And if you cannot accept yourself the way you are, then accept the fact right now that you can't accept yourself the way you are.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of paradoxical. I guess this is what I want to say, that some of these things are addictive. Like when I mentioned winning the lottery or getting a raise, let's give that as an example. You work really hard, you want to get a raise, and you get the raise, okay? And you feel great. You have this high. Hey, I just got a raise, and you celebrate, and you tell everybody about it, whatever. It's a momentary high. It's addictive. It's really like any other kind of addiction, that these things make us happy over a very short period of time, and then you use the word set point. We're back to the way we were. I had a lot of experience in a university, and I got my promotions, and I was very happy. Is the president of my university any happier than the janitor who cleans his office at night? I don't think so. I don't know. I just don't know.
George, and I'm sharing that. For me, what I hear again is we're always looking for we're always looking for that gratitude or that adulation outside of self. Everything is dependent upon how someone makes me feel. How, it's external versus internal. And what I hear you're saying is it's very much motivated from internal.
Yes, exactly. That is what I'm saying. That it was a book many years ago saying happiness is an inside job. Okay.
Yes.
And that's correct. The way to happiness, you're never going to get happiness by changing external circumstances. It's just not going to happen. You get these addictive highs, but it's not going to bring lasting happiness. People keep trying, and it doesn't work, okay? And that's how my book, From Seeker to Finder, really points out, to a large extent, what doesn't work. It points out, to a large extent, how to break that addictive habit of looking for happiness outside of yourself.
What else we hear in this is, when you were making the analogy to the diet book is that it isn't about changing a book, or it isn't about changing who you're listening to or who you're talking to. It's about changing the habit. Change the habit that you have made inside of you to a habit of gratitude, a habit of appreciation. Make these habits things that are so positive and so powerful inside you that happiness will come with that.
Exactly. And these habits are mental habits. Exactly right. Changing the mental habits. And they're hard to do. It's hard to anybody who's tried to change habits knows that it's hard to do. It's not going to come in 10 minutes.
Well, George, I as a minister of the Word of God, the Gospel, I see it day in and day out where individuals, they come because they're seeking. But change doesn't happen until that person earnestly, inside themselves, are ready to make the change. You could preach a sermon all day long. It sounds great. We can hoop and holler. We can do all the things external. But until a person, and I can look at myself, I'm not going to point a finger, look at myself and says, until I was ready to make a change, and then by a habit and being motivated, make steps each day, is when I saw that true happiness in my own life. So I concur what you're saying. Yes,
very, very true. And that's one thing that I have a lot of gratitude for myself, that I came to that point in my life when I really made the commitment to be happy. And a lot of people never get there. So I just have a lot of gratitude and a lot of thankfulness that, I say, I was a seeker, and there are a lot of seekers out there.
Yes.
Well, George, I'm thankful to have you on here. We're going to take a break. For everybody out there listening, we are talking with George Kimeldorf. The subject is happiness. And if you want to follow along with us, you can open up another screen on your computer, go to FromSeekerToFinder.com. You can follow along with us. Obviously, if you're driving, don't try that. We're going to take a break now, and we will be back in about 1 minute. Stay with us. And we're back. You're listening to Answers for the Family. Our topic today is how to discover everyday happiness.
And George, I have a question for you. As we're listening, and the listeners are listening, I'm a young person, not for real, but I'm going to act like I'm young right now. And we're in a society where our youth are being bombarded by the media. Look this way, feel this way. All this stuff is being pressing them from the external. And, and we look at, as research tells us, neuroscience, the brain doesn't really form until you're like age 25. So they're being bombarded by all of these issues. And it's defining our kids, our youth, and it's not good. And
yes.
My question would be for you, if you were a younger version, what would you tell yourself how to be happy?
That's a great question. In fact, one of my fantasies, one of my dreams is be able to teach children in school the art of happiness. I don't think that's going to happen in my generation or even the next generation. But you're right, we are bombarded by all these things, totally bombarded these things, and, TV all around us. And it's really hard, I think, to show a child that those things are not the source of happiness. It's very difficult, and I think the answer is you can't explain it to a child. You have to be it.
Model it.
Mm-hmm.
Model it. Do it. Be it. Be someone. Be a parent who experiences gratitude. Be a parent who expresses gratitude. Be a parent who expresses love, compassion,
George,
acceptance.
That's really great what you're saying, because in the world of behavioral science, we call that behavioral modeling.
Right.
Be it. Just don't talk about it. And my wife and I, we always use this term, even with our own kids as we raise them. We use the term, it's what's caught, not what's taught.
Yes, very well said.
Absolutely.
There are particular nerve cells that are, I forgot what they're called, that actually do mimic, they make us yawn when other people yawn.
Called mirror neurons.
Exactly, mirror neurons. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I couldn't think of that. Mirror neurons, yes.
Yes.
Now, George, one of the things that I think you touch on in your book, and that is how interpretation plays a pivotal role in determining one's happiness. Talk a little bit about how one can change the interpretation in regards to the events that allow us to make a difference outside ourselves and in the world.
We live in the world of interpretation. That is, you and I don't see the same world. And in fact, that's even true literally. There have been a lot of people who've studied the fact that we don't, I see outside and you see outside, and we don't see the same thing. Mm-hmm. Our brains interpret. That's what brains do. We live in the world of interpretation. And so the whole way to do this, if you're going to find a point to make a difference, is to make that point in that interpretation. How do you interpret the world? Again, it's the idea of your thinking, the thoughts that you have, your interpretations of the world. And we always live in interpretation. Someone says something and you say, oh, he means that, she meant that, whatever. We're constantly interpreting. And one of the things we can do very easily is just question that interpretation. Mm-hmm. Is that really right? Is that person that I think is X, is that person really that way? Mm-hmm. Did he really mean that? Should I feel insulted? Constantly another way to say this is don't believe what you think. Because what you think is interpretation. Just doubt it. Consider the possibility that what you think you know is wrong.
Well, and yes, I would agree with that, but I think also you have a situation as far as interpretation that many of us will, you'll learn more about the other person based on the way that they keep interpreting something. There are situations that I will find where something will be said and somebody will interpret that, and they'll somehow have found a negative way to interpret that. And I'll say, I don't understand how you got to that point. There's a couple of ways to look at this. You seem to have chosen something that's pretty negative. And in fact, I can recall telling somebody one time, you know what, let's start from this paradigm. And that is, interpret what I say in the most positive way that you can, and I'll let you know if it's any different. Okay.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. That's a great idea. I like that.
Yeah. Because it's frustrating sometimes, that you go, well, just because there's maybe a lot of negativity that's put out. I mean, we all have heard the thing about the media that if it bleeds, it leads. They want to push with the most negative thing possible. That doesn't mean that we have to embrace that in our lives. We don't have to look at the negative part out there. It doesn't mean that it's not there, but it doesn't mean that we always have to interpret everything in the worst possible case.
Yes. I think too, Alan. I think about I call it deductive reasoning. You're right. Interpretation it varies across the board, and we always use this term, the iceberg syndrome. A lot of times what we see is the 10% of the reality, and that 90% is which is underneath the iceberg is where the real drivers are at. And so if someone's always coming with this negative interpretation, it makes you think it looks right on top, but something is going on. And we got to get to those drivers. And I think switching from a negative interpretation to positive, and that positivity is so powerful, is getting people to move in that direction on that scale.
Right. And George, which brings me to the question of what were some of the major difficulties that you ran into as you were trying to put this book together? Did you find that there were some negative forces out there trying to steer you in a different direction?
Well, yeah, the interesting thing is that the negative forces were all internal, okay? I'm a terrible writer. That's a negative thought I had, okay?
Okay.
I can't do this. I can't finish this chapter. It doesn't make sense. It's not coming out right. I had this huge amount of negative forces, okay? But they were mostly internal, okay? In other words, I didn't have anyone out there telling me I couldn't write or I couldn't, whatever do it. But it's all this internal stuff. And I had to overcome that. It is really true. I'm not a skilled writer. I didn't learn how to write. I didn't, it's a skill. By the way, I'm good at playing the piano. I like playing the piano. I can play the piano. I never learned how to write. It was not one of my skills. And so that was an obstacle. Just my own negativity, my own feelings of, hey, I couldn't do this. I can't do this.
Then how can we learn to really love the world, everything in it, despite the violence, crime, suffering, and more?
That is exactly what I talk about in my book. A lot of people say it cannot be done. They see the world as, the violence. They see the hypocrisy. They see all the problems in the world. And as you say, it's a question of interpretation. So, for example, they can go to the Grand Canyon and see that some of the rocks don't look quite right. This color isn't quite right. It's a little bit too hot today. Oh, I forgot to put my sunscreen on. It's time for lunch, okay? So here you are at the Grand Canyon, and there's splendor all around you, and you're in your head with your little thoughts. That's the way the world is for me. The world is for me the Grand Canyon. There is splendor all around me. Every place I see, there is splendor. There is the opportunity for joy and happiness everywhere. I can read the same newspapers that you read. I can see the problems in the world. I'm not saying they don't exist. They're there, okay? But they are there. And that's the way it is. That is reality. And I can just be a lover of reality. I can be a lover of the world. I can even be someone who wants to change the world without disliking it. And that's why for many people, making a change is challenging. Number one, they underestimate the difficulty. And they think, well, once they decide to change, that will be sufficient, which it isn't. And as you pointed out, there's a part of our mind that strongly resists change. But the other thing is, when you try to get from point A to point B, it's a mistake to think that you have to reject point A. I have to label this bad and the other good in order to make that change. That's a big mistake. There was a very famous 20th century psychologist, Carl Rogers, who really said it better than I can. And let me quote what he said. He said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change. We cannot move away from what we are until we thoroughly accept what we are."
Wow,
the same is true for us and the world.
That's a good point.
So we can accept the world. We can love the world. We can have joy and gratitude for the world. And we can do our part in changing it and improving it.
It's a good point, George. Good point. We have another question that came in from a listener. And this person is a family therapist. And they say they read a lot of books about happiness. And they purchased your book From Seeker to Finder last week and found it to be one of the most profound books they said they've come across in a long time. It is engaging. They said it's an engaging read that they feel will help people make small shifts that will lead to happier life. Many thanks for giving us a great new tool to share. And it's 118 pages of power-packed goodness.
George, tell us a little bit about, we've only got a few more minutes, what is next on your horizon? Do you have something else that you're going to be working on? Are you going to continue? I know when you spoke a little bit about, in regards to education, how it is, you'd like to be able to see that there were classes. I tend to believe that there can and that there should and that there will. We just all need to recognize that the need is there and make it happen. It may take a little longer to get it in the public school system, but that doesn't mean that we can't start getting that information out there in the public school, in the private school systems, as well as just doing seminars so that people can really start shifting their focus.
And I believe, I want to answer that, Alan. I believe that the earlier, the younger we can get this type of information into our society with our youth, it's definitely going to make it a better place to live, because now our youth are going to grow up with this as part of their, I'd say part of their curriculum of life, of happiness.
Yes, I think it's much more valuable than reading, writing, and arithmetic. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are worthwhile skills, okay? Let's teach them. But if we can teach the art and science of happiness, can you imagine what this world would be like? Mm-hmm. We wouldn't necessarily have bullies in the public schools. We wouldn't have wars, people wanting more power as a way to happiness, people wanting more wealth, greed, as a way toward happiness. These things don't work. And yes, if we can get those things out there, that would be the real thing that I would love to do. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. And that's one of the things I've been really looking at. So now I wrote this book, What's Next? What next can I do to spread this? And I'm doing it out of gratitude. I was taught this. Someone taught it to me. And I'm going to play it forward. I'm going to do it. And that's what makes me happy. Why am I doing this? It makes me happy to make others happy.
Right.
What else is there to do?
And George, we appreciate you doing that. We thank you so much for it. And again, for everybody out there, if you want to find the book, you can go to FromSeekerToFinder.com.